Okay. So firstly, I'd like to thank Bill and the organising committee for inviting me here today. Thank you for that introduction. Reminds me how old I am, which is always a worry. Again, I'll wear a couple of hats. One is the lead of the industry pharmacogenomics group, which I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm also actually a co-founder of a small biotech that is developing gene-targeted antisense therapies for treatments for patients living with MND. So again, not for discussion today, but I'd like to again focus on the work of our group. I'm sure many of you are unfamiliar with the work of the I-PWG, and that's absolutely fine. I realise with my background, I'm probably the outlier in this room today, and that's absolutely fine. Sorry, I have some of the slides on. Pardon me. So I'm just going to describe who we are as a group. And also how we operate. How do we actually serve and support our membership? And I think more importantly for the group here today, I would like to just discuss something. What are the areas of interest for the industry in the field of pharmacogenomics? What are the sorts of things we're discussing? What are the sorts of things that we're working on? And obviously our interactions with regulatory agencies are very important. And I've got a case study to talk through our work that we've done with the FDA. And I think also important for the discussion today is the future direction of our group. Bill, you came and spoke to us earlier in the year. By the way, it's fascinating hearing about this network and how you collaborate. We collaborate in industry, and I think what we need to do now is also continue to collaborate across industry and academia and healthcare providers. So I think that's something up for discussion today. So yes, the I-PWG was established in 2000. I was thinking about this on the train on the way up here. Actually, at that time, as you all know, it was a pretty significant time for the world of pharmacogenomics. The whole, the genome has been sequenced. I was actually working in the genetics group at GSK at the time, and my team and our group were tasked with implementing pharmacogenetic sampling or pharmacogenetics into GlaxoSmithKline. It was a tall order. In those days, no one was really familiar with the field of pharmacogenomics. We weren't sure entirely what we wanted to do. And we had to first go about collecting pharmacogenetic or pharmacogenomic samples from our clinical trial patients. The organization, GSK, were not familiar with that. The people conducting our trials, the physicians, the investigators, the clinical teams, the nurses, and more importantly, the patients were certainly completely unaware of this. This is 25 years ago. It was the very early days of doing this work. And so what we did at GSK, we probably did, I think it was probably a fairly sensible thing. We actually reached out to some colleagues in other companies and actually asked the question, so how are you doing this? And that was really the origins of the Industry Pharmacogenomics Working Group. We are a very collaborative group. We're a not-for-profit organization, and we set out initially to really share information pre-competitively about actually how do you work in pharmacogenomics, the science, the operational aspects, the regulatory aspects. How do we work together to really figure out how we do this? And that was a while ago. We currently have 23 active member companies. We've actually added a few more recently. We have kind of the criteria for membership is really quite straightforward. It's a major pharma and biotech who are working obviously in drug discovery and drug development, but more importantly, have to have a footprint in genomics, which, as you can imagine now, every single company does, right? Everyone involved in drug development has a genomics component of their organization. How do we organize ourselves? We have regular monthly meetings where we invite speakers from a range of disciplines to speak on a range of omics topics. It's our membership who actually suggests speakers. I've got a list of people who've spoken to us recently. And again, we want to make sure that our membership stay on top of the field. And you can only do that by bringing in experts from outside. The group is co-chaired by two colleagues on a rotation basis. Currently, my colleagues at Regeneron and Biogen hold those seats, although the new co-chairs coming in are from AstraZeneca and from GSK. And one thing I would say is we are an international group, and although we may feel sometimes like we have a very strong US presence, we've actually got a really big active UK and European group, and obviously with the co-chairs coming in UK based, I think that will help with interactions with groups such as yours going forwards. So as I mentioned, we have a range of speakers come in and present to us. I've kind of listed these out. I don't spend us too much time kind of going through it, but as I mentioned, our members suggest who we have to come speak to us. Bill, it's obviously the top of the list. It's not necessarily by order of merit, rather than actually how with the sequence of events, and I mean that in a nice way. It's more the sequence of events of how we've done this year. More importantly, though, these are kind of groups, people that are really advancing the field, and we need to make sure that industry is really aware. And again, I come back today. Today has been already hugely informative to me about what your network does. And so again, it comes back to the point earlier, Bill, you made around collaboration across groups in this field, and we need to continue to do that. Moni, you presented to us earlier in the year about the CERSI project. I know obviously we're speaking about that later on today. Colleagues at GEL came earlier. We actually heard about the Genomes project, hugely important. And I would just say there, the invites come from our membership. And the important thing is, our members, we're 200 people in our membership. And what we want to make sure is the people who invariably invite colleagues here are already involved in your projects, are very familiar with the work of GEL, Bill, the work you do, and Munir. And so for us, I think it's got to be bilateral. We want to make sure when speakers come, it's a really good opportunity for you to share the work that you're doing. All information is shared, and we want to make sure that if you want to access other companies or other groups, biotechs, collaborators, we're the group that actually can facilitate that. And I think that's a really important point to make. Again, we had presentations from the UK Biobank, and I had a really nice, again, specific point around the Yellow Card project, again, as a presenter. So, and I would say, and hearing some of the presentations already today, there's some amazing work that's going on here. If you don't mind, unashamedly, I may approach you to come and speak to our group, because I think the whole area around health economics especially is hugely important, and we'll come on to that in a little while, but I will, if you don't mind, be expanding that network. Here's just again, a couple of other examples of presentations that we've had outside of the UK. Again, I'm not going to list these out. I'll pick out a couple of things. Going back to the year 2000, and when we first set around trying to collect samples, there is a huge education component around making sure people understand why collecting these samples is really important. Fast forward 25 years, our member companies conduct trials in many countries, but there's still challenges. There's still challenges to actually collect samples either at a regulatory level or an ethics committee level. And so here, and I don't wish to necessarily single out our colleagues in Belgium, but we were asked, again, we had the ethics committee come and to present and give us their perspective, some of the challenges they face and the reasons why they have, compared to some of our other European colleague countries, a little bit more robustness in how you collect samples there, and I'll leave it at that. But our group can serve as a way of actually sharing our kind of challenges with these groups, so they understand what we're trying to do, and more importantly, why we're trying to do that as well. Good connections with groups at Leiden. We had a speaker from the FDA. I'll come on to that interaction in a second. And also another area of interest for our group is also better understanding, pharmacogenetics in some of the developing countries. I know a number of you in the room here have a number of projects in developing countries. We're always of interest to that. And again, I think we'd like to follow up again if you know of collaborations, projects that you could kind of come and speak to our group about. Again, just going through a couple of other things. I'd like to just kind of point out a couple of things that I think of relevance to this group. Pharmacogenomics, it's a collaborative area, right? I think, even though I realize I'm the industry person in the room, you can't do this alone, and again, in this area, there's a huge amount of collaboration between industry and academia and again, across the range. There are a few things here. The NIH All of Us program, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with it, very, very interesting program, again, around expansive, use of pharmacogenomics in a wide range of populations. And the other area here, again, I'm not going to list these all out, but again, you see there a speaker around companion diagnostics. Even within industry, it's a kind of hugely complex field. I've worked on some trials where you try and do companion diagnostic testing within a clinical trial setting. It's complex. It's complex from a regulatory perspective, and it's complex from a trial perspective. And so we have people come from outside who come and actually give us a bit of a world view on things, and it's hugely helpful. And a couple of other, again, points around guidelines in China. We, again, as an industry, we need help often. And again, we need that external opinion and advice to come in. And a couple of talks there was around, again, HGR guidelines in China, and also the recent changes in DOJ ruling regarding genomic research and data access. I think probably from interest, hopefully for the audience here today, that's a kind of sense of the external speakers that come. But I thought I'd just highlight a few of the internal talks that we get. And this will give you a sense of what industry are currently working in. And this, by the way, is a snapshot. It's not a full, a revision of what they do. But again, you'll see there, we have colleagues from AbbVie talk about, actually the analysis of the samples they collect. And I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure it's the same in academia. I know it is. You're always interested about what other groups are doing. How do you do it, right? And so as a group, we are very open. It's pre-competitive. We're not there talking about the most recent data from a trial that's sensitive. We're talking more in general terms that will help to advance the field. The speaker there from Regeneron, Together for Change, is a very interesting initiative aiming to address the healthcare inequalities of the African American population in the US, not just access to clinical trials, but also access to healthcare. It's a program, it's a public-private partnership that Regeneron are involved in. Really, really interesting. And again, I can share information about this kind of following this presentation. Colleagues in Biogen, again, you may be familiar with Aduhelm, again, a treatment that came out for treatment of Alzheimer's. It's a bit complex, didn't necessarily meet the threshold for approval. And again, the team there actually spoke about how pharmacogenetics really helped understand the adverse event profile in that trial. Again, hugely helpful for, and it's all published information, it's published data. But again, it's the sort of thing that we discuss in our group to get a sense of, well, how do you do that? What's the relevance to you? And more importantly, what's the relevance to us in some of the programs that we work in? Roche came along. Again, obviously, I think we're all very familiar with the role of ADME pharmacogenetics in trials. And you'll see their colleagues from AstraZeneca presenting, and again, around a nice project around CYP26 alleles, working with the UK Biobank, again, a group that we're very, very familiar with. And again, at the bottom here, another topic that comes up time and time again is how do we actually store genomic data? And what are the guidances? How do we do this? And again, interestingly, that ties in with requests for return of results from clinical trial participants, which is another really big area for industry as well. There's no set format, there's no set guidelines, and our industry members are really in discussion about how we best do that and address those sorts of requests when they come through. Again, as I mentioned, here is a group that is very open. We're very transparent. We like to collaborate. And another way that we actually, and sorry, let me just go back a little bit. I just wanted to carry on the theme of some of the presentations. Pharmacogenomics, I think, is a kind of some ways limiting term for us. And I'll come on to that in a second. It's multi-omics. If you can imagine industry, we're trying to really advance the field in many different areas. Proteomics is obviously a big area for industry as well. And we had a nice presentation from colleagues at J&J. And I'm just going to pick out a couple of other points. Roche, the return of results pilot study. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's really it's a really hot topic for industry. These requests come through rarely, but they do come through. And as an industry, we need to really tackle how do you return pharmacogenomic data to clinical trial participants, that actually, again, recognizing that often the data is not necessarily clinically meaningful, and there are huge caveats around that and how that's managed. And so, again, we invite our speakers when they come to often address that question. And it's something, by the way, we can pick up with the network afterwards, but it's an area of interest, and it's something that needs to be worked on. And again, as an industry group, that's what we're talking about. Okay, I'm just going to, as I mentioned, we are this kind of collaborative group. One thing that we actually, and what I wanted to kind of highlight is one way in which we share information and get a better understanding of how the topics of interest in our organization is we conduct these surveys. And again, I'll give you an example. So the sorts of topics that companies need to get advice on. So just to get a little bit of background, these are surveys that are conducted within our membership anonymously, and we encourage openness. And again, I'm going to got a couple of slides that will just show the sorts of topics where companies come to us and say, hey, we have a question, we have an issue. We'd really like to know how our industry partners are working on this. And again, I've just kind of listed these out here. Data sharing and consent. Consent's obviously a big issue. Management of pediatric clinical trials, management of pediatric clinical study participant consent. I mean, that's an interesting area and something that one of our member companies just weren't sure on how to do this. And so again, by coming to our group, they're able to get a better handle, a better understanding of how that's done. WGS in clinical trials. What are companies doing? How do we do this? What's the routine? What platforms are you using? What sort of data are you generating? And how do you manage that data as well? Participant tissue handling in China. Interesting, that's probably, with the current geopolitical climate, probably less of our companies are actually working in China at the moment. That presents other challenges as well. In relation to existing trials that they have ongoing. But I can certainly say that there's a slight move away from that and into different geographies for various fairly obvious reasons. And again, here I'll kind of highlight ApoE testing in clinical trials. In my career, I've worked on a couple of Alzheimer's studies, one of which the entry criteria for clinical trial participants was knowing their ApoE status, which for individuals, as we all know, the ApoE genotype is a risk factor for onset and progression of Alzheimer's. That was hugely challenging. It was a big decision by the company to make that a part of their entry criteria of the trial. And as you can imagine, that had to be managed very carefully, not just with trial participants, but with also investigator sites and throughout the conduct of the study. And again, that was one of the surveys that one of our member companies asked for. Basically, how do you do this? What's your experience operationally? How do you do it? And more sensitively, how do you manage that appropriately? A couple of other kind of topics, again, I just want to highlight. And again, Bill, I can share these slides after, by the way, rather than kind of talk through this. Companion diagnostic development work and ICF wording. Companion diagnostics, again, a lot of our companies are involved in trials where companion diagnostics feature. Again, it's a complex area, as I mentioned earlier. It's complex to actually perform these trials, and more importantly, to try and bring that through to approval at the end. And obviously, that's a survey that was focused around the consent. And again, a couple of other points I'd really like to highlight here. So again, it's just very specific, very focused, but again, these topics inform our membership and they really help knowledge sharing across the group. Just changing tack slightly. Another role that the I-PWG can play is we're able to actually just put teams together, okay, and we're able to actually address some of the kind of key aspects from these surveys. So currently we have what we call these small limited duration working groups. At the moment, we have a biobanking group. I think biobanking is, again, something that's I'm sure all of you are kind of involved in. And the remit of that is to really look at the biobanking of clinical samples for future unspecified use. That's something that comes up time and time again. What do you do with these samples? How are they managed? How is consent managed? And again, that's a working group that's really addressing that. I mentioned about the genomic data set storage group, again, looking at issues relating to storage of large genomic data sets. The fact is that there is actually a lack of established and sustainable guidelines. I don't think it's necessary for industry to set those guidelines, but I think it's for them to work together to really establish best practices and principles, and that's certainly what we're doing. We have a gene therapy working group. Gene therapy is slightly outside of our remit. It wouldn't traditionally be the area of interest, but we realize out of our member companies, interestingly, probably about nearly half of them have active gene therapy programs, which again is a little bit of a surprise to me. And that group got together, and again, just being fairly candid, there aren't really clear regulatory guidelines around this. There are a lot of challenges in that area, the conduct of the trials. Again, there's a whole range of topics and issues that group get together. And the nice thing about these working groups is it's a good way, as I said before, of sharing good practice. And again, previous groups, we have a regulatory group, we have an education and a communication task force. Interestingly, in the early days of this group, we did feel in some ways it was helpful for our group to help educate, and I use that word very, very carefully, the people that were doing conducting the clinical trials, because again, it's just such a huge task to inform people of the groups I mentioned, the stakeholders of collecting pharmacogenetic samples. I think that need has gone away, most definitely. And I think actually, if anything, it's now we should be listening to the academics and the people working in the clinical trials and networks such as yourselves about what's going on in the world. And that's something I think, Bill, and we can pick up on after. But again, that's just a sense of some of the working groups that we're involved in. The other, I think, positive area for I-PWG is, as you go, there are a number of kind of guidance papers that come out from various groups here. I've listed a couple: EMA, NIH, and the Ministry of Health in Israel, which is a number of years ago. The reason I highlight these that when guidance papers come out in these, and again, they're very specific, often member companies do not want to reply to them directly. Okay. Again, I don't wish to, if you're company X, your legal team are not going to want for you to put your head above the parapet and say, hey, we're not very happy about this. It's restrictive, or we don't agree with those aspects to the guidance. What the I-PWG can do is it can be a lobbying force, and we can speak as one voice. And often what we do when these guidance papers come out, we work together to put in a formal response. And certainly with the EMA, the paper there, we actually were able to have some good dialogue with them. They understood our questions, and they understood some of the, I wouldn't say issues, some of our points of view around that guidance paper. And things can change, and certainly change with the NIH, and certainly change some recent FDA guidance as well. So again, as a lobbying group, we have a voice. And I think you have to be very careful about how you use that voice, but make sure you can direct it in the right way to affect the right change. I mentioned earlier about our engagement with regulatory agencies. Just so you know, actually last year, we had a scientific exchange workshop with the FDA. Interestingly, we were recognized, by the way, that the FDA environment has probably changed since we had that meeting, and I'll leave it at that. But we were invited as a group of industry people. We went to their campus, and we were there. There are about 40 staff members from the FDA, and really, the purpose of that workshop was to really share our concerns or issues or challenges that we have when we in this field, and for the FDA to listen. It was a very, again, very, very productive dialogue. We had the agenda was set by both FDA and the I-PWG. And again, we were able to really specify and clear out or be clear about some of the challenges that industry faces. And what I would say, it's not always straightforward. And I think, and I'm sure, in the roles that you do, we all face challenges. Interestingly, in the field of pharmacogenomics, there are always challenges. Our members have challenges within their own companies, often, just being brutally honest. And there are also other aspects, again, regulatory, ethics, country guidelines, etc., that doesn't necessarily always make things straightforward, which is why collaboration, partnership, and transparency is a really important aspect. And again, we will plan to re-engage with the FDA shortly. But this is a really good workshop. There weren't any minutes taken, naturally. It was a closed meeting. But again, it helps us advance, I think, our discussions with key agencies. I spoke to a couple of you earlier. We'd like to do the same with the EMA. And again, it's just really about finding, I've spoken to Munia about this, it's really making sure you engage with the right people so the industry can have a voice around the table. We want to be a partner here. And I think it's really important that we can provide that context for the agencies. Just finishing up, and again, this is just a brief presentation today. What's in a name? We had our face-to-face meeting recently. One thing that came out is actually probably our name is not truly representative of the work that we do. Pharmacogenomics is hugely important, it's embedded in what we do, but we're a multi-omics group. And again, I think something that we need to do is really capture the imagination of our partners and really be more representative of the work we do. And that's something that we're kind of talking through. Again, I mentioned there more focus on proteomics and other omics. And I think there's a couple of other areas of interest for our group: state-of-art analysis of biobank data, and obviously, the use of AI and machine learning. I think it's something that we're all very familiar with. And again, as our group, as we get that's obviously hugely embedded in industry, and we need to better understand those tools, how they can help the science, how they can help progress the work that we're doing, and that's something that we're focusing on as well. I mentioned about our regulatory engagement with the FDA. We do want to continue our discussions with the FDA and have further regulatory engagement with these groups. It's hugely important that the agencies understand the work that we do, not just per company, but again, groups such as the I-PWG. And my kind of last point, and I'd like to really kind of dwell on this a little bit, if you don't mind. We're really recognize that we need to develop greater relationships with key stakeholders working in this area. I've mentioned a little bit about how we're organized, and I think, again, what I'd like to hope was conveyed here today is we're a way of being a network for groups such as yourselves. Bill, we've spoken a little bit about this. I see this as a part of the journey that we're on. And again, anything that I-PWG can help with networks such as this, I think we need to explore. I think less words, more actions will be good. And I think hopefully today is a little bit more of, on our side, I think is more where we would like to go. As a group, we're growing. We're pretty kind of confident in the work that we do, but again, for me, it's been hugely informative and interesting what I've learned today so far on the groups. And I think if we can help your network, help other networks here in the UK and elsewhere, that's what we'd like to do. So as I said before, that was just a brief presentation, a brief sense of what we do. And please, if you have any questions, let me know.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah. And really illuminating, I think, around all of the work that you're doing. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. Ron at the back.
Yeah, so good question. Firstly, apologies for our website that's kind of locked in mid-1990s. We're currently working on that, right? So that's something that we're very aware of. You're right. So regarding our membership, we do not actually have the criteria for membership are companies that are actually involved in drug development. Okay, so we try to steer away. We have a lot of vendors that approach us, and we try and steer away from vendor companies because either our member companies are already familiar with those, and we don't really want to be that sort of group. We'd rather collaborate with people who are really doing the science. So that's the reason for it. Yeah, we don't have any companion diagnostic companies in our membership. And apologies for the website.
Industry having operations and not really actively trying to provide genetic data of processes. I want to use that pharmacogenomics, pharmacogenomics in the same context. They really hoping to learn more about using pharmacogenomics.
Yeah, so let me answer that question in some ways broadly. It's on the minds of every member company, absolutely. And I think something that we are discussing that, and we are aware of it. I think something that we need to do is actually be a little bit more outward focused. So groups such as yours actually know what we're doing and be aware of. And today was a little bit of that. The pharmacovigilance, no, that's a huge part of what we do. It's done per member company rather than across companies. We don't have groups looking at it across the group at the moment. But yeah, it's obviously an area of interest. I'm not sure I've answered your question. Yeah, so again, I think if I understand your question correctly, I mean, again, those sorts of consent form issues tend to be done on a per company basis rather than across our group. It's something that's being looked at, I'm sure, but I think I understand your question correctly. If I answered your question, I'm not sure I have, sorry. Yeah, that Yeah, well, so that's again just broaden it out a little bit. Industry is hugely challenged by the consent process for collection of samples. Some of our member companies make it mandatory. If you enroll in this trial, you will provide a sample and this sample. Some of our member companies still do it as an option. It's a separate consent form. Interestingly, I think the industry is moving more towards the former to make it more easy now. And again, that's not, I wouldn't say challenging, but it's just the way the industry is moving to. Standardization. I think that's easier for physicians, easier for healthcare providers, etc.
Thank you so much, Julian, once again. There's I could see more hands, so I think carry on those conversations in the lunch break. We're going to do our level best to get everybody home on time, which means I'm going to let you all go to lunch now. People could please try and be back for 1:45. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well,